This is Dr. Brandon Beals. I am one of the founding and lead pastors of Venture Church in the Seattle area. Fun fact, I've been to 48 of the 50 states in America.
My name is Tony Matar. I'm a pastor of Venture Church. I pastor a church called Venture Seattle, in the heart of Seattle. And I have been to 6 states in all of America. Welcome to Pastors Unfiltered.
Hey everybody, welcome to Pastors Unfiltered. This is Pastor Brandon. I am here without Tony, who is shockingly on vacation somewhere. No one knows. He claims he's seeking out balance in his life. I do have 2 special guests. I have Pastor Johnny, our youth pastor.
Let's go.
Pastor Claire, our former young adult pastor. What is your new title now?
I'm the Connections and Internship Pastor.
Connections and Internship. Well, they're jumping in. We decided basically if Tony's not here, it takes 2 people to replace Tony, so I'm using both of them. We want to thank our sponsor, Anderson Lawn Care.
Let's go.
If you need any yard work done, you need your Christmas lights taken down. Hey, it's getting towards springtime. Everybody's going to want to clean up their yards for the summer. You better get booked with Anderson Lawn Care now because he is going to be busy in the future. Last thing I want to do before we jump into the topic at hand, just want to let everyone know that Di and I are off to Egypt on Saturday. It was about probably a year and a half ago. We agreed to go on a tour of the Egypt version of the Holy Land. So we'll walk where Moses walked, Abraham was, different places like that. We're taking a boat down the Nile River from Cairo, and so it should be an epic trip. But I will not be here next week on Pastors Unfiltered. We have a special interview with Chad Robertshaw, who ministered at our Venture Vet ministry recently, and you're going to love Chad. By the way, Chad has... Do you guys know he has 5 million followers on his podcast? We have 5 followers,
Shout
and
out.
he has 5 million. Just kidding. We have 258.
Faithful.
That's currently what it is.
Faithful.
Want to start off before, just to kind of introduce you guys to everyone. Let us know what you're watching, what you're reading, what you're listening to. And Judah also wants to know what you're doing for fun.
Great.
So what about you? Johnny, what are you watching?
Yeah.
Other than the Packers lose to the Eagles.
That was tough. That was hard. I mean, how did you feel about the Raiders lost in the playoffs? Oh, wait. They didn't make the playoffs.
Hey, I made a lot of money betting against the Raiders.
Fair enough.
Just as I made a good amount of money betting against the Packers.
It was a hard watch. It's okay, though. Right now, I'm watching a show called Abbott Elementary. It's on Hulu. It's a comedy special.
Out of elementary?
Abbott
Abbott
Elementary. Yeah.
It's about an elementary school?
Yeah, it's kind of like it's like The Office. It's like a new age television sitcom. They're doing new seasons like every 6 months.
Have you ever heard of it?
It's really, really funny. Like
Really?
hilarious.
Okay.
Yeah. So Quinta Bronson's doing her thing. Shout out if you ever hear this for any reason. Shout out Quinta Bronson. And then I'm reading. We're in a mental health series in the youth ministry. So I just finished this book called, I actually had to look it up, Depression, Anxiety, and Other Things We Don't Talk About. That's by Ryan Waller. It was a good insight as we kind of talk about different mental health issues and stuff like that, especially with Gen Z. So that's where I'm at.
What are you listening to?
I don't listen to podcasts or anything like that. I'm going to be very straight up.
Music.
So, music-wise?
Yeah, what
Sure,
type of
yeah.
music do you listen to?
A lot of rap, a lot of R&B, a lot of soul. I just found this Brazilian funk song. Shouts out my Brazilian people. We've actually started getting a lot of Brazilian students in our youth ministry.
Okay.
And this Down for the Culture. And so I posted this on my story the other day. And
Are you aware that Brazilians are voted the most beautiful people in the world?
I did not do that.
I went on a trip with 10 pastors to Brazil.
Uh-huh.
And immediately when we walked off the plane, we made the entire country uglier.
Wow.
Oh.
Yeah. So I forgot. I don't know how to pronounce the name of the song, but it's great and it's awesome.
Okay. On that note, Claire, what are you watching?
Well, first,
Are you a big TV person?
Not at all. But Johnny didn't answer what he's doing for fun.
Oh, yeah. What do you do for fun?
I like to play video games. I like to go
What video
on.
game are you currently playing?
I was playing Madden 25, and then I just got this one called Mafia 3, first person.
Oh, are you like a hitman, or are you trying to capture the mafia? Are you a good guy or a bad guy?
I'm in between. Anti-hero.
Oh, okay.
There you go.
All right.
What about video game? Are you a big video game person?
Yeah, no, I'm not, which is crazy.
Crazy thought.
Yeah, I'm watching this show right now, which is the first show I've watched in probably like a year, but it's called No Good Deed. It's on Netflix, and it's with that girl who played Phoebe in Friends. What's her name? Lisa Kudrow.
Sure.
Okay.
I'm getting blank stares. Are you serious?
I hate Friends.
I watch Seinfeld. I watched.
What in the
There's
world?
no duplicate for an original.
There you go.
Okay, that's
Boom.
crazy. Anyways, really great show, kind of comedy drama. What am I reading? I'm reading a surprise psychological thriller book called A Very Bad Thing by J.T. Ellison. I picked it up without reading the back, and I didn't realize that it was 500 pages. And normally I read books that are like 300 pages, so
Okay.
it's been taking me like a week to finish.
Like when you picked it up, you're like, this seems like a little bit bigger.
Well, it's
than-
on Kindle.
Oh,
so-
gotcha.
Yeah, so I didn't like look at how many pages it was. I just started reading it. I'm like, why is this so long? And then I looked at 500 pages.
So, Claire, you read a lot of books.
Yeah.
Like, how many books did you read in 2024 on average? You don't need to.
No, I know the amount.
Oh.
Rachel and I kept track. We read 40.
Oh,
Yeah,
okay.
so not like that insane amount.
So, do you consider people that listen to audiobooks the same as reading?
Gosh, if you would have asked me this like 3 months ago, I would have said absolutely not. They're frauds. Like Erica Wall, she only listens to audiobooks, and I call her fake. But recently, I actually started listening and reading. Like while I'm in the car, it helps me get through the book quicker if I can listen
Of
in the
course.
car. So I actually started doing it, and so I know that's how you read books. And so I'll give
Over 60 in 2024.
yeah.
great.
Whoa, really? You're gonna read 60 books?
No, it's what I read last year.
Oh,
2025.
Over 60.
wow. Okay, yeah, you totally beat me. But were they? A lot of them were probably like educational too, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Those count.
I
yeah,
would
no,
say
they do.
our staff right now, I'm taking you guys through Prodigal God
Yeah.
by Tim Keller. We start that next week. Christian's going to be leading next week. That is an amazing book on audiobook to listen to.
Really? If there's a good narrator, I'll totally listen to
I
it.
listened to the whole book on a hike with Di. Then listened to it up the mountain.
Oh, wow.
And halfway down the mountain was done.
See, that's
Then I was bored the rest of the hike.
yeah. I'm surprised you hiked.
Yeah, I find it really boring. I find it like I love going on walks if I have something to listen to, but I consider hiking walking up a hill.
It is.
It's all it is.
Yeah.
But I find it boring. That's the biggest thing. My wife's like, she's like mesmerized by every rock
Grass.
and every tree. I'm like, I got these in my backyard.
It's true.
And I got like a gorgeous view from my deck. But, more power to all the hikers out there.
That's right.
Okay. So you're watching a TV show no one's ever heard of by
Okay.
stars somebody from a TV show
That's-
no one cares about.
That
There it
is
is.
insane.
Boom roasted.
You're reading a typical Gen X thriller.
Gen X.
Whatever they call it, next gen thriller.
Sure.
What are you? What's the last thing? What are you listening to?
I'm not. I don't listen to anything. I don't really
You
listen
don't listen to
pod-
music?
Well, okay. I got back into running recently, so I've been listening to a lot of I don't know.
Brazilian music like Johnny?
Hardcore DMX. Ice Cube.
What's that one? Okay, this is gonna sound inappropriate when it comes out of my mouth, but there's this artist called like Big Booty Mix.
Oh,
It's not.
yeah.
It's just like pop songs that are all strung
They're like,
together,
yeah, spliced
and they
together.
don't stop. And so that's what I listen to when I run because then it's like you're never like in a lull. you
Yeah,
know?
that's very good. That's actually really
So,
cool.
That's what I'm listening to.
You ever listen to Big Booty Mix?
No.
You should check it out. It's on SoundCloud or YouTube, right?
And Spotify.
So, what genre of music do you like?
Okay, that's not my genre. I was just
Big Booty
saying.
Mix. Number one.
I don't know. I like indie music.
Al granola.
I don't know.
Neither one of you. Well, Johnny does not strike me as a country music fan.
Oh,
but
I love
you
country.
would've-
Post Malone Country.
Okay, that.
He dropped a country album.
Okay,
Yeah.
good.
There you go.
Okay,
I
very
love
good.
country though.
Post Malone's all country now.
Yeah.
He's only doing country.
You gonna go
Isn't
see
that
him next summer?
I'm actually going to go see him in Vegas.
Wow.
Post Malone and Jelly Roll. May.
Jelly roll.
I love Jelly Roll. Tony has a like personal vendetta against Jelly Roll.
Of course he does.
There's just certain people that Tony decides
Yeah,
that
he
he's
does
not for.
Just
I know.
anti.
And some of them I can't say their names because it would be hurtful because they probably listen to this podcast.
Yep.
Hey, what I want to talk to you guys about is specifically a church trend that Kerry Newhoff shared every year. In fact, he's been doing this for 10 years. He shares 5 church trends for the upcoming year. And what he usually does is he assesses statistics and trends over the last couple years, comes out with some very bold statements about what's going to happen the following year. He is often right. He's occasionally wrong. But one of the ones that he said resonated a lot, especially with Tony and I. And he made this statement. He said, Gen Z, which is the generation that you guys are primarily working with, says Gen Z is in revival and retreat at the same time. Let me just kind of elaborate on that. And then I really want to have a discussion with you guys from your perspective on what you're seeing and how we can maybe turn the trends the other direction, at least in our sphere of influence. So there's about 70 million Gen Z. So it's the 3rd largest generation that's very prominent in the world. Baby boomers being the largest, millennials being 2nd largest, Gen Z being 3rd, then us Gen Xers, as always, coming in last. What generation are you? Are you Gen Z?
Gen Z.
You're Gen Z too? All right. Out of the other generations, just out of curiosity, as a Gen Zer, what do you think of millennials in general?
They're so weird.
They're so weird.
They're so weird.
What do you mean?
No, they're awesome. They have a lot of like interesting.
They're quirky.
Yeah, they're quirky. That's a good word to describe them. I feel like a lot of millennials are quirky, but but millennials don't want to be millennials, so I feel like they try to be Gen Z. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, like they literally had to invent the phrase like zillennial because they didn't want to like, don't put me a millennial, don't put me in that basket.
I feel like people don't want to be.
Because all the negative stereotypes of millennial is that they want to just live with their parents.
Yeah.
They're non-committal, and so they don't want to claim it. So how does your generation typically feel about Gen Xers? It'd be your parents, right? Your parents, your bosses.
Yeah.
I love Gen X.
Gen X, like, I'm indifferent.
Gen X is very similar to Gen Z as far as like in some of their ways they value. What about baby boomers? Be your
Like our
grandparents.
Just like old people, dude. I don't. Whenever they talk, we ever like I was talking to my grandpa, like there was just like a super big disconnect. I'm like, we've just lived completely different. We just see the world completely different ways.
Yeah. Now that I honestly didn't interact with a lot of baby boomers, but now that I took over guest care, like a lot of the people who volunteer are baby boomers, and you learn a lot. They're very sweet. They love to serve.
Been through a lot. Are
And
you
talk.
random fact about baby boomers? Did you know that the word yuppie did not exist until baby boomers?
I don't even know what that word means.
They don't use that word anymore?
What's a yuppie?
It's short for young urban professional. So like basically for years there was rich, poor, middle class, poor, middle class. So baby boomers created the idea of upper middle class.
Okay.
And so like somebody that was upper middle class was classified as a young urban professional. They owned a house, they drove a BMW, they had one of the first cell phones, were highly educated, were lawyers, doctors, like young urban professionals.
Okay.
Anyways, the word yuppie. Another weird fact about generations, this has nothing to do with anything. Did you know that the phrase young adult did not exist until millennials?
The more you know.
And you know why? Because they could not figure out a way to describe people that were in their mid-20s that still lived with their parents. So sociologists came up with the phrase young adult to describe them because they're not quite adults, but they're not young anymore. So they called them young adults.
Wow.
This feels like Jeopardy fun facts. Can I get what is yuppie for 500?
Immediately I said yuppie, and I looked at Claire and she was like, what? Anyway, 7 million Gen Z. As early as 2020, Gen Z was very interested in spiritual things. In fact, upwards of 70% of them had an intrigue in spiritual things. And back in 2020, of all Gen Z, about 25% of them went to church weekly. Another 20% would go to church once a month. About 10% of them would go to church every, say, 6 months. And then another 15 to 17% would go to church at least once a year. So all in all, that was about over 70% of Gen Z back in 2020 went to church at least once a year. And you started seeing things, especially in the last few years. Like you've got the Asbury revival that was really centered around Gen Z. And you probably heard about the different revivals at college campuses, especially because a lot of them are happening at colleges in Texas, where you're from. And if you listen to Carey Nieuwhof's podcast, he gives the overall trends, but then the following week, he brings in people that specifically specialize in your guys' generation, talking about the revivals on all the college campuses. It's very fascinating.
Yeah.
So that's where it was. So very hopeful. When I think of venture, and I think our church has always steadily grown, but it's only been since COVID we've experienced what you would say like explosive growth. Like we had 500 people every year or something like that.
Yeah.
Our explosive growth really began with Gen Z just came here in droves. Like your guys' friends, people your age, just started coming in droves. Fast forward to last year. So the stats for last year show that Gen Z went from being totally interested in spiritual things to falling off of a cliff. So where it was 25% of all Gen Z went to church weekly, now it's down to 15%. When it was an additional 20% went to church once a month, it's an additional 14%. If I go to the whole stat where you talk about it all and you talk about 72% went to church, like I said, I go to church. I might only go once every 6 months, but I go to church. I go to that church down the street.
Right.
That is now down to about less than 60%. So this has been a shift that has happened dramatically in just 2-3 years. So it went from going to church, being very interested, to it falling off of a cliff. And then, but at the same time, you still have these revivals that are going on, but attendance with them, their interest in spiritual things is different. A couple things that they have figured out with this stat is that their interest in spiritual things didn't always lead them to Jesus. You know, sometimes it led them to Buddhism. Sometimes it led them to psychedelics, just other types of religions. Some it led to Islam.
Right.
But those are the stats. First off, what are you guys seeing in your ministries?
Yeah. I think I see the revival aspect of a lot of students encountering God or being open to the supernatural. I think where there's a disconnect is the distrust in the church as an institution.
Why is that?
I believe that they've seen a lot of hypocrisy. Like I think as much as the church was aware of a lot of leaders falling, a lot of people coming out, a lot of people make mistakes, there's also like these stigmas that are attached to the church that when you're not willing to draw near enough, you can just assume these stigmas as true. Like the church only wants you for your money. The church doesn't really care about the people around them. The church is only about like idolizing leaders instead of actual people. Like the people who are in a pulpit are just as sinful as everybody else. All these different things that have really not given or presented an opportunity of like, why would I want to be a part of that? Seeing the imperfections, or they have met the people who, okay, I am curious about God, curious about faith. I know these people who say they're Christians. I go to school with them and their lives look just like mine.
Yeah.
You're the devout believer who shows up every Sunday, every Wednesday, and you talk the same, you walk the same, you go through the same hardship and react the same way that I do. So what is going to church doing that?
Right.
My life, like what I'm doing, how is it different?
Yeah, that's good. What are you seeing, Claire?
Yeah, I think similar to Johnny, like you use the word, like there's a lot of distrust in like Christians in the church and stuff. And I I feel like I've never experienced a time more than right now in my life where, like, I feel like no young adults go to church anymore, besides the ones that do go to church, like outside of, Venture and whatever. Like, if I meet a young person on the street, there is a 95% chance that they have never been to church, or if they have been to church, it was one time and they never went back. Like, and what's interesting is that another thing I'm seeing with a lot of young people is that they want to put their faith in something. And so a lot of young people right now are really into like astrology and like, crystals and even just like being spiritual, quote unquote. Like a lot of young people want to be spiritual, but don't want to go to church because people my age want to have fun and they associate church and Christianity with rules, which means they can't have fun. And that's kind of the main thing that I'm seeing with people my age within Venture and within like our YA ministry. I think that it's awesome and there's lots of revival and things like that. But I also think that a lot of young adult Christians tend to live one way at church and then another way, behind the scenes too. So yeah, I don't know. It's kind of a weird time for Gen Z. It's very weird. Like some people are all in and some people I feel like are half in, half out.
Yeah.
One of the things that I have found interesting is like when I compare millennials and Gen Z, if I ran into a random millennial, I would brace myself if they found out I was a pastor. Like they just immediately had a very, I would say, if you've heard the whole scenario about Pavlov's dog, they had a very Pavlovian response to me being a minister that was usually pretty negative. I don't get that response from Gen Z. Like they're like
they're very open.
They're I would say they're
spiritual.
very respectful of it.
Yeah, they're very respectful. I think everyone is super respectful, super like understanding of. I mean, Johnny, you're like a Christian and Christian.
Wait, who told you that?
I meant to say you're a young adult. You're a young adult. You're a young adult though, so you probably see that like when you're out or whatever, and you tell somebody you're a pastor, like with people, if you tell somebody your age what's like the normal response that you get?
Like people who are my age?
Yeah,
like,
people, yeah.
Yeah, like I mean, I think the latest example I had, I joined a football league, and then everyone was kind of going around that introduction of like, oh, what do you do? What do you do? And then I was the only person who was like in ministry. And I was like, I'm a pastor. I work with youth students, that whole kind of thing. And they're like, oh, dude, man, way to be passionate about the kids.
And it was people your age that were saying that?
People our age.
Yeah.
So it was just like, we're not really about that, but
yeah,
like, good for you.
Yeah,
you know?
exactly. I feel like people are very respectful of that. Like Gen Z is very respectful. But yeah, I definitely feel like a lot of people in the church a lot of young adults in the church are kind of half in, half out, even if they go to church every Sunday. And then, yes, a lot of the people that I meet are young adults are probably not in church at all.
So one of the things that I have noticed, like reflecting back when I listened to his podcast and I started reading up on it, determining if I agreed with it or not, I was reflecting back at Venture. I would say our explosive growth began with Gen Z and it has continued with Millennial and Gen X. Like our church has tons of Gen Xers now, tons of Millennials, and actually a massive increasing number of even baby boomers, retired people, because they've kind of found friends and family here. We've always had a really good number of youth, really good number of young adults, but I have found that, like, as I reflect back, that the young adults are very flighty. That they go to like 5 churches and they're not really plugged in anywhere.
But I found out recently, like, because I have experienced this personally with people in my life, that like I think I used to make fun of people who like went to a bunch of different churches because they wanted to get a boyfriend or whatever. But I was realizing that like, honestly, a lot of people my age, and truly, there are so many people that I could name that do this, go to different churches on Sundays to like find a spouse because that's the only place. They're not going to bars on Friday and Saturday.
And they don't want to do Tinder.
Yeah. So like that's the place that's why they hop around. So that's why a lot of young adults in our young adult ministry like hop around between multiple churches because they're truly trying to find like, oh, cute boys or girls or whatever. So
hey,
Whatever works.
It makes sense.
Yeah. But yes, they are flaky.
Eventually, they pair up,
Yeah.
get married, and then they come to Venture.
It's
Shout
true.
out.
This is where all the young married couples go.
We have so many young married people here.
What have you guys found leading ministries in these areas that has been the most challenging working with that generation?
Yeah, I think I want to go back to the earlier comment of like people having the church as an institution. We're seeing when we see new students come in, a lot of them are really wrestling with the fact of like, okay, why can't I just like not go to church and like get closer with God, or that understanding of like I build my own spirituality, and it's really cool to help answer those questions and field their concerns because they're trying to live this new life without really knowing or understanding what it really looks like.
So where does the distrust come from? Does it come from leaders that maybe they were listening to their podcasts failing morally, or does it have to do with the fact I started going to church, got really connected to my youth pastor, and then he left or she left?
No,
What is the reason?
I don't think it's personal experience. I really think it's more social than anything. Of like for the longest time, like you really couldn't talk about how I think I'm speaking on behalf of students, high school students,
Yeah.
that like sharing that you're a believer was kind of like a badge of, it wasn't a badge of honor. It was something that you kind of wanted to hide.
Okay.
You wanted to kind of, because you were opening yourself up to questions that you realized you didn't have the answer to. And that made them feel less than. It made them feel incomplete. And so when they feel like they're not equipped to actually talk about these things or answer these questions. And I always like push our students like, hey, listen, like the best thing that you can say in these moments is I don't know, instead of trying to make something up. But it's also an opportunity for invitation of I don't know, but would you want to meet my youth pastor and ask him that same question? Or would you want to help look it up or study together? That whole kind of thing.
What have you found to be the challenges?
Two big ones is what we were just talking about, flightiness and flakiness. People, young adults telling me like they're all in and they want to serve, they want to like be super involved, and then like a few months later just literally going MIA, like I have no idea where they are and they're going to another church, whatever. That's really hard. And then oh gosh, what was the other one? That was the first one. I had another one in my head, but I forgot it.
You can bring it up when it comes back to you.
Oh, wait, I know now.
Okay, go
I
ahead.
was going to say, the young adults, it was in my head. The young adults living, like, it's really hard and frustrating being a young adult pastor and, like, being especially the same age as a lot of these people. And, like I said, seeing people live half in and half out is really hard because I see these people and then like, they're worshiping and, you know, laying down all these things at the altar. But like because they're adults, there's so many things that they can do on the weekends or do outside that I'm like, I know how you're living. And a lot of people, I feel like a lot of young adults nowadays don't feel conviction about a lot of things.
So you guys have both mentioned the exact same thing. Like you kind of, I would say you didn't say hypocrisy, but you really implied it. You're kind of talking about saying one thing, doing another thing. It's all boils down to that. Why do you think, why is it that way? Is it just like being a lukewarm kind of go to church on Sunday occasionally, go to YA services, youth service occasionally, but doing my own thing outside of it? Is it just normal now?
I think so. I mean, a lot of people that I know, like, because it feels really good to know that you're doing just enough, but like you're doing just enough, you're going to church, like you're checking off the box, but that your heart is not fully in it. And that's what I'm seeing with a lot of young adults is like their heart isn't fully in it. So they're living two completely separate lives. And it feels good to, you know, get drunk and sleep with your boyfriend or girlfriend. Like it feels good to do all those things and go out to bars on the weekend and not tell anybody you're a Christian. And then, you know, Sunday night, come to YA and lift your hands up and things like that. And I think, it's just being kind of not diving all in, being lukewarm.
It would bring clarity on why the numbers would fall off a cliff like that. Because if you have 1 foot in one world, 1 foot in the other, eventually sin will consume you.
100%, yeah.
And they'll fall off the cliff.
It usually happens because they'll end up getting in a relation for young adults. They'll end up eventually you creep so much toward the other side that like then you end up getting in a relationship with somebody who isn't Christian, and then oh my gosh, you're never going to church. Like we'll never see you again.
Yeah.
So how do you explain? Like, is this true? Like, based on things that Johnny had said earlier using this, but even though they have one foot in the world, one foot in the church, they expect their leaders to be all in.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like they expect this grace for them, but they're not giving the same grace to their leaders.
Oh yeah. And this is a practical, like, leaders and mentors in my life, since I've even like entertained church, seminary, and everything, have always told me that like what you do limited, the people that you lead will do in excess.
Yeah.
That like you do 10%, they'll do 100%. So they see you with a drink in your
Yep.
hand, they'll stay. That's permission for me to get blackout drunk.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So like I think it's these different lines of what you're willing to, how you carry yourself, how you model yourself. But they're really to be really loose of like, well, I mean, he's a pastor.
Yeah.
Like, she's a pastor. That's why they live like
Yeah.
that, you know?
Yeah.
So what is the difference then? Like, obviously, there's people that have one foot in the world, one foot outside. I know how that ends up. Are there people that you guys can think of that had an encounter with Jesus, something happened, and it caused total life change? Is that still happening?
Oh my gosh, yeah. I can think of like one of my good friends, Marina. I mean, we all know her and her story has been told, but like she was not Christian at all. And, you know, she's told her testimony many times, but like living very much not a life for Jesus at all. And like God very radically changed her life. And even I was just hanging out with her the other day, and it's like you can very clearly tell somebody who's been changed by the Holy Spirit. And obviously she's a person and makes mistakes just like I do. But like you can just tell when you're talking with somebody that is filled with the Holy Spirit and exudes that in every conversation. It's so cool, like seeing people like that. And I'm like, wow, God is still doing miracles. He pulled her out of the pit 2 years ago, and now here she is living her life for God.
Yeah.
It's really cool.
Yeah, some things like that are evident. Like we talk about the people who live the double-sided life, the casual Christian, the carnal Christian, if you will, versus the people who like they take it, they're serious about it, and it's in the overflow of their life. That everything you like as maybe even as a pastor, I don't know if it's just because we're around these people all the time, but it's like this. You see the fruit of their life of when you're actually sold out and non-compromising.
Yep.
I see that. I mean, I'm in the phase of ministering to these students who I see the evolution in their growth from freshman to sophomore to when they start buckling down their junior and senior year. They just start taking it more serious.
Yeah.
And that's the discipleship pathway. I mean, you talked about that in staff meeting today about like there's a need of discipleship with this.
Yeah.
Yeah, you get to a point where you're walking this fine line where you don't want to, especially when you're working with youth or young adults, where you don't want to be legalistic because legalism literally repels them from the church.
Yep.
And for those of us like that are Gen X, we got saved in the 80s, and that was like the peak of church legalism was the 80s. And it was really hard to be like a Marina and go from the world to the church. It was like radically different cultures. And so I think part of the pendulum swing is to not be legalistic.
Yes. Yeah.
We removed expectations and standards at all.
Yeah.
I just know that like when people sincerely get touched by Jesus, you just don't want to go back.
No.
Yeah.
Like for me, I remember what it was like to not know Jesus. And I remember the things that I used to do. I don't want to go back there. Claire, you and I were hanging out, I think it was yesterday. We were kind of talking in general about the, beer drinking, cussing kind of pastor crowd. We were kind of talking about that. And, again, I don't have an issue with alcohol. I think this generation is fairly obsessed with alcohol, more so than other generations. I think that's something that they need to have it not be an idol anymore, and God needs to take control of. But I always say that, like, so I don't have a theological issue with alcohol. I don't drink because I'm AG, and I signed a covenant that said that I wouldn't. But going to the swearing thing, when I got saved, I think the first thing that God redeemed was my mouth. Was the words that came out of my mouth. You want every word to be edifying, to build you up. So I don't really necessarily understand that, but it wasn't because somebody told me I needed to live this way.
No.
It was because God transformed me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I didn't have any desire to go back.
And I feel like there's a real, what we were talking about, like being a lukewarm Christian. I might have not had that radical salvation experience because I grew up a Christian, but like I remember even just a few years ago what it was like to be a lukewarm Christian. Like I know what it was like to live one foot in the church and one foot in the world. Like I know what that feels like. And like you were saying, PB, like it's horrible. I don't want to go back to that. And I want to be the type of person that like people sit down with and are like, wow, the Holy Spirit flows out of Claire when I'm around her. And yeah, it's just, there's so many people nowadays who just, I don't know, you can tell when you sit down with them, like,
Yeah.
they're living one foot in the world, one foot out. Or there's people who I sit down with and I'm like, they're filled with the Holy Spirit.
Yeah. And I think that should be encouragement for all ministers of like, we not pushing legalism. Like at the end of the day, like I'm not here to shame you for everything is, but I will be a clear line of like, hey, like let's call a spade a spade. Let's call sin.
Yeah.
And what it is. But as you begin to get closer with God and he begins to inform you of who you are, the renewal of the mind, the transforming of your nature, like that has to go with a built relationship. So as people are living that double-sided life, I feel like it's two roads that are splitting away from each other. I mean, it's literally what sin is, like that causes that divide. And so like as you teeter that line, there's going to get to a point where you can't be on both sides anymore. You really do have to lean in.
And I think like one of the challenges I think that young adults have when they go to 3 or 4 churches, where I agree with, you know, better than like I joked, using Tinder, whatever.
Yeah.
The problem is that when you're in it 5 places, you're really in nowhere.
Yeah, you have no accountability.
And you don't have anybody that's noticing if you're there or not.
Nope.
Yeah.
So the amount of times that I have talked to one of you and said, hey, I haven't seen so-and-so for a while. And you're like, well, they go to like 4 different churches, so we never know where they're at.
Right.
Yeah.
And probably those churches are saying the same thing. They're like, I thought they were going to Venture. I thought they were going to here. I thought they're.
Yeah.
And then what happens is you don't have anybody that's discipling you, anybody that's really pouring into you.
Yep.
Because you're not around. So I think that becomes problematic also.
Yeah.
I'm curious your perspective. So like the tension point, like you said, you used to like judge people hardcore on it, or at least make fun of them. But the people who are looking for a spouse versus that need of discipleship, what's the balance?
Well, I mean, I would always encourage people to just stay at one church and get really plugged in. I am trying to be unbiased when I say that I think it's totally cool to go to multiple churches because I'm trying to be understanding. I really do think that there is value and benefit in getting plugged in a church. And I'm not saying that you can't go to maybe different like young adult ministries and things like that. Like outside of your Sunday morning experience, maybe you're hopping around to different Wednesday night, Thursday night things. I think that's cool. I think your Sunday morning experience, like you should be plugged into one place. That should be where you like, you know, give your money, serve, like, you know, those types of things. So
I would sum it up. I completely understand the why behind it.
Yeah.
But I'm not sure if it's producing the end result that we want. Number one, are they really finding mates? Number one. And number two, when it's all said and done, are they moving forward in their relationship with Jesus? In other words, are they further along in their relationship with Jesus today than they were this time last year?
Yep.
I mean, that's the hard thing that everybody needs to always ask themselves with that.
Yeah.
One of the things that Kerry Newhoff, in his most recent podcast where he was talking to the Gen Z leaders, they talked about what has sparked kind of the move of God in your guys' generation has been confession.
Yeah.
And specifically, you were talking about Marina. Now, I remember the revival night that we had where Marina came up on the microphone and just basically shared her testimony, really abbreviated version of it. But I mean, that takes a lot of guts, and there's a lot of people that wouldn't do that in front of, 800 people that were there that night. And I think they talked a lot about confession. What do you guys think about just kind of the act of confession being the key that takes somebody from maybe lukewarm, 1 foot here, 1 foot there, to all in with Jesus?
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. You
Sorry.
No, you go. Go ahead. Yeah.
I was just gonna say, like, that is like the number one thing that I feel like can set people free. And can take people from being lukewarm to being all in. Because I think a lot of Christians, there are some of those people who come up to the altar every single Sunday and ask for the same prayer request that they asked for the week before. But I do think most people keep their stuff inside and are ashamed to talk about it and are fearful. Like, what if I tell them that me and my boyfriend had sex? Like, then what, And I have found that every single time somebody brings that forward and confesses it, like the freedom that person experiences and the way that I've seen people grow so much deeper in their relationship with Jesus is insane. And that to me is like what I always encouraged our young adults to do, and why we would always have like times of response at the end, is so like they can go find a leader or go find me or whoever and like confess and say like, this is what I'm struggling with, and I don't want to live like the world anymore. I want to live like Jesus. And that's the problem, is when you're holding all this stuff inside, that's when the enemy is going to get to you even more, because there's no accountability. There's no one to pray for freedom or healing or anything like that.
Yeah.
When you confess something spiritually breaks.
Yes.
But then in addition to that, when you confess it in a group, you're in essence inviting that group to ask you how you're doing.
Yep.
Yeah.
So if somebody confesses, hey, I was struggling with this, you're just randomly, you see that person, you're just kind of hanging out. Hey, I remember that. How you doing with that?
Yeah.
And so it invites accountability from people that love you.
And it also makes you feel less alone. I think a lot of young adults think they're the only person because they're a Christian, and they're, struggling with drinking too much or whatever it is. I feel like people my age feel really alone in that and feel a lot of shame and think like, oh, I must be the only one who's struggling with alcohol and like I'm going out every weekend and that's so embarrassing. I could never tell Pastor Claire that or any of my Christian friends. And like once I've been in so many settings where people like release that and everyone around the circle is like, oh my gosh, I've been feeling the exact same way, or like I've been struggling with the exact same thing. And there's so much freedom that comes from that.
Yeah. And you think about it, even brings in the revelation of, okay, well then how much did we actually know each other? Like if it's something that was around. Too many people are satisfied with seeing or showing a shade of themselves and seeing a shade of another person. That as breakthrough begins to happen, as confession begins to happen, as ownership begins to happen, you begin to reveal like, okay, like there's so much more to each other, to our companionship than what we thought was available. I was meeting with a student yesterday, and he's having a moment of confession and where he's missed the mark and fallen, and he was pleasantly surprised that there were other people in his same boat. And I was like, this invites an opportunity for accountability to like charge
and I
each
think
other.
they're also pleasantly surprised when they're not judged for doing it. And I think that's where we become understanding is, hey, we're surrounded by broken people. People
and
mess up all the time.
I've been there too. Like I just had somebody talk to me yesterday about an area that they're struggling in. And I literally was like, oh yeah, I've struggled with that too. And they were like, oh my gosh, I was so nervous to tell you and all these things. I'm like,
the tax fraud discussion.
Definitely struggled with tax fraud. It's a big one of mine.
I was thinking about this, that you guys have kind of gotten to know Eileen Hunter-Wolf over these last maybe year as Eileen and her husband started coming to the church. Eileen's husband, who passed away, Roosevelt, was a really good friend of mine, traveling evangelist. And Roosevelt said a quote to me one time, like he was confronting me about something, and he said this, and I've quoted him forever. And he said, because Brandon, it's not your job to change people's habits. Your job is to put them in a position where Jesus can change their heart and habits will follow. And I think that is kind of the key thing when we live in an environment where we can be open and honest about who we are. Then and we feel safe being able to be who we are. Then we can be in those moments where Jesus can get a hold of us and change everything. And it really boils down to, I mean, this is like what I talked about at church on Sunday. This was Jacob. Like Jacob spends 40 years of his life as this deceptive manipulator, schemer, has this profound encounter with God, where in the end, God says, what's your name? And he says, my name is Jacob. And he says, no longer will you be called Jacob. And something happens when we confess who we are. Like God can change our name and he can restore us and heal us. How do we create within, maybe let's start specifically youth ministry, young adult ministry, but then kind of veer it to the overall ministry of the church. How do we create a culture of confession? where people can just be honest?
Yeah, I think in youth right now, the big things that we're trying to push right now is candid community, like true candid community, something that has depth behind it, something that has, I guess, a space where like, hey, how are you doing? Like, how are you actually doing? And learning to actually teaching the students how to actually ask those questions. Solitude, like spending time with Jesus. That like sometimes there's those moments when you are with God that like I feel like the imperfections or the things like you kind of feel it in your soul. Like I'm supposed to get this off my chest, and actually permitting that space to do it. Of I really feel like God's telling me to talk to Pastor John or talk to my youth leader about what I'm going through, where I'm at. And also like biblical literacy of like informing themselves of like this is beginning to resonate with my soul. Of I'm realizing more and more like I'm in the wrong. I'm lacking ownership in where I'm at.
Yeah.
So I feel like those three key things are ways that right now we're pushing to steward opportunities of confession or openness.
Yeah. I would say the biggest way for young adults is groups. Like, not trying to promote our groups at Venture or anything. Sign up start February 9th.
Let's go.
But honestly, like that is the way that I have shared this before, but like I'm a young adult and I'm in a young adult Bible study with a few of my friends. And that has been the most amazing place for me to be able to confess like the deep parts of my heart. And for someone who struggles with being vulnerable and being open with people, and like I don't like to, one of you guys were talking about kind of like putting up a wall sometimes, and I do that a lot. That has been the space where I have been most easily able to confess what I'm walking through and not feel alone in the things that I'm going through. And that is exactly what I've shared with our young adult ministry is like, you guys need to be getting yourselves in groups, because if you're not, again, you're going to feel alone in this. You're going to feel like you're the only one. You're going to feel shame. You're going to feel like, you know, I'm the only person that's dealing with this. This is so embarrassing. And so, yeah, I would say settings where you're with other believers who can encourage you and keep you accountable. That is how we enable confession.
Are you a big crier, Johnny?
There's only three things that make me cry: Jesus,
sports,
movies, and dogs.
Dogs?
Dogs. Bro.
Me and sports movies. Are you a big crier, Claire?
No, I never cry. Ever.
Oh.
I hate crying.
When was the last time you cried?
Well, embarrassingly at this like Bible study thing, I like it was one of those things where it's a pent up so many emotions because I don't usually kind of let things out, and then it all just came out, and I was like, whoa.
It's like 30 minutes.
Yeah.
Just like straight tears and yelling.
Literally. It was just a couple weeks ago. But yeah, I don't usually cry.
You cry a lot?
Oh my gosh.
What makes you cry? Tell us.
One time your dog got lost and you cried.
I did. I cried when I thought Ozzy was gone. That was probably the last time Judah saw it.
I remember 2020.
Yeah, I'm not a big crier. I cry sports movies.
Okay.
Make me cry.
Rudy?
I like things that end positively, like where everybody lives happily ever after. That's moving. Occasionally the Holy Spirit moves on me and it'll make me teary-eyed.
I cry at church like literally every other week.
Yeah.
Like a
but
baby.
not like normally. In my normal life, I'm not a crier.
Yeah.
But
No, I'm fairly even-keeled emotionally. It's why I'm pretty good at poker.
Fair enough.
So I have a really good poker face.
come to our men's poker night in February.
Yeah.
Just a couple other questions that I have for you guys along this. Are you guys, when you think of working with your own age demographic, and I remember what it was like. I mean, when I first was a youth pastor, the younger Gen Xers were my youth ministries, and then it was all pretty much most of my youth ministry career was millennials. So I know what it's like to work with your age demographic, but are you guys encouraged by what you see, discouraged, or the jury's still out?
I would say I'm encouraged. I love the value of authenticity on this generation. I love how they're bringing in their passions and shaking up the world as we know it, like things that have been long-standing, like workflow, how you make money, these different kinds of things of like just breaking norms, I would say. Which, I mean, I'm speaking about literally my own generation, so maybe I'm just hyping myself up. But I think those are the key things that I'm like, dude, you guys are just so dope. I love it.
Are you talking about students or?
Yeah. Wait, is that what you're talking about?
Just in general, Gen Z.
Oh.
Oh yeah, Gen Z students.
Yeah,
would say in
I
general.
feel like I'm neutral. I don't know if I've been working with young adults long enough to know if this is just how young adult age people are in general throughout the course of time, or this is just my generation. But I don't know. Part of me feels like a little neutral about it because, yes, I think there's a lot of revival happening around the country and things like that. But also, I do feel like there's a big group of young adults who still kind of have, again, like we've been talking about, 1 foot in, 1 foot out. And I would really love to see the Holy Spirit move more in the hearts of those people.
I think the interesting thing will be, can revival be translated through discipleship into actual commitment to Jesus? I think that is going to be the key, because you can't live in a revival your whole life.
No.
Yep.
And eventually you got to plant roots and grow. And those are all words that we don't, they're not fun.
No.
Revival is a fun word.
Yeah, it's true. It's very true.
So if other pastors are listening to this, and I'm giving you the freedom, this won't cost you your job, how you answer this.
Great.
Like, what would you want your pastor to know that would help you succeed better at your job?
I think
Like, if you were talking to a group of senior pastors, what advice would you give the pastors to help their young adult pastor or their youth pastor? Claire, go ahead.
I would say just knowing that things maybe are different than when you were younger. Like, people my age are just different. And I think a lot of older pastors kind of get stuck in the like, well, like even this morning you brought up like, oh, we should have, 25 interns or whatever. And it's like, sometimes it's just hard. It's hard to get people, like young people, to want to join a college internship program that, they're going to be working at the church every day for free. It's really hard. And again, like I was saying, I don't know if that's like a new thing just with my generation not wanting to do those types of things. But from what I've seen in the past at Canyon Creek, like we would always have like 35 interns or something crazy like that. And so I think, just for older pastoral staff to know that I think it's just becoming a little more challenging to get people in the doors. And a lot of people my age are reluctant to come into church now.
Yeah, I think it's easier with your guys' generation than it was millennials.
Yeah, I don't know.
Definitely more complicated than it was Gen X and baby boomers. But
people like that seem like
millennials were
in.
opposed. Well, that's because what happens is, as people get older, they get more grounded and more conservative, and they want to. And you got like all the mistakes of life. You look back and you think, well, I've tried everything else. Why don't I try this church thing?
Right.
And so you get a lot of that. I would say just as a trend, it's been easier to reach at a younger age Gen Z than it was millennials.
Yeah.
I do think like part of like using the internship example, which is, I mean, I hear that. I receive that. I'll process it and see if I agree.
That wasn't really directed at you, I guess, but
I was thinking about it. They're like Gen Z. They all go to school.
Yeah.
So I think that's a big thing. Like,
that's
even
what we're seeing now.
Millennials, there was a lot like internships were larger because a lot of them were looking for alternative education.
Johnny's senior class right now, he has like 20 seniors or something. Every single one of them currently is committed to a 4-year university.
Yeah, and it's like crazy because it's not like, oh, I'm thinking I'm just gonna do like community college. They're like, no, I'm a D1 athlete about to like
Harvard,
go full ride,
Yale.
or like I'm gonna be a lawyer, and I'm like, no, you should do that.
And I would say I think that has a lot to do with it, and we want to cheer them on. I mean, I want a church full of these people that do that. So maybe there's an evolution of the way that works. Yeah, that's good.
Yeah.
What about you?
I would say, as a youth pastor, talking to lead pastors, not even just my lead pastor, dude, I would say the big thing is I think it helps a lot for the youth pastor to have a clear roadmap of not just numeric goals, but like discipleship goals of what it looks like to send these kids off into adulthood. Like envisioning my freshmen and sophomores now as men and women of the church who are part of Cole Hasty's young couples ministry or Connor Takata's young adult ministry, who I'm looking even far-sighted of, like, when we see them as 30-year-olds, 35-year-olds, what are the things that we really value them being instilled in their heads that were like really fostered in the youth time of like getting them, I guess, to like what is the finish line? What is the goal of like they're prepared and ready to be sent off to the next thing?
So more have a maybe 30,000 foot level, see how the youth ministry, young adult ministry interconnects. We talked like in staff meeting this morning, we talked about the importance of all these symbiotic relationships all of our departments have, and how if everybody is doing their best and all the departments are working, everything works together. But if one breaks, it kind of breaks the whole system. That is really good. I mean, in the end, the goal isn't that we have we have 500 students in the youth ministry, which I would be totally for if we did.
You got it.
But that doesn't help me if 500 students in the youth ministry does not equate to 3 years later, say, I don't know, 200 of them going to church.
Right.
That doesn't work. I mean, if we have 100 students and 80 of them are actively involved in the church when they graduate, I'd say it's a huge win.
Longevity is always huge. Like if I can like come back 10 years and see like a random men's breakfast and Dylan Stansberry's there, married with kids, I don't know.
Do your youth students, as a side note, invite friends to youth? Usually, is that a normal part of youth?
Yeah, we don't actually like push it a lot of like, hey, bring your friends, bring them all the time.
But like do they?
Oh yeah. I mean, we are averaging right now 1 to 2 new youth students. So I think our biggest thing right now is just like retention rate of what that looks like. People who are curious, people who are asking questions, people who are from different religions, that kind of thing.
Because I was going to say, like, I didn't know if that was a Gen Z thing, but in the young adult ministry, like, that is a huge thing. Like, Tracy, she literally brings 1 or 2 friends to church every Sunday. There's, like, someone new that she brought. So I would say that's something that when you were asking, like, are you encouraged, discouraged about? I would say I'm super encouraged because I feel like every new person that decides to get plugged into venture, every young adult who decides to get plugged in brings like 5 friends with them.
And that's how you know that there's legit life change.
Yeah.
Because if your life is legitimately changed by something, you want to tell people that you love about it.
Yep.
Oh yeah. That's
and
why
you want their lives to be changed too.
Yeah. That's why we're seeing so many new guests come on Sunday nights, is because it's all people that, their life got changed here and now they're bringing their friends. It's really cool.
So if a church wants to have a thriving young adult youth ministry in the future, what do you think are the keys?
I think it's got to be, for young adults, cool. Got to be cool. That is the reality. Which means you got to have, got to have it. I'm not saying it's all about like attractiveness, but also like Gen Z is kind of into being cool. So it can't be like, let's have a potluck on Saturday mornings. Like, I think having an actual service with worship and a message and, cool. Connor's super cool, like a cool young adult pastor. I think that is really great. And then also, like having small groups, place for them to connect outside of that.
I would say substance. Something that like when students come, like they have to chew on it. Like it's something that they're like, something they can think about during the week. Like when they know when it shows up, whether it's through worship, like God is moving, God is speaking, God is saying something. But also it's entrenched in like the preparation of everything.
Yeah.
Like if you're not praying and contending for your youth ministry outside of it and you're writing your message on a Wednesday morning, like what do you expect to happen if you don't have like plans for not only for 1 year, but for the next 3 or 4 years of how God's going to move and praying over that? What do you expect is going to happen? Like having a well-informed plan. I believe God honors preparation. And so paving the way, it's so much bigger than strategy. God will eat strategy for breakfast. He will bless the messiness of it all for the people who are faithful.
So there's going to be a bunch of parents of young adults, teenagers listening to this podcast. They're worried about their kid.
Sure.
What advice would you give them?
Why are they worried? What happened?
Well, I mean, it just typical. My kid's doesn't want to go to church, whatever. What would you say?
It takes one moment with Jesus will forever change everything. So there is always time on the clock to continue to pray, to continue to intercede, that God would have them, no matter the mess, no matter the mistake. Like God is a loving God who doesn't abandon his children.
Yeah, I agree with that. It really does just take one moment. And I've seen that happen so many times with young people. It's just one. You always say this, at just the right moment, Jesus crossed your path, and then everything changed.
Yeah, when I was a youth pastor, every time I got an opportunity to talk in front of the adults, I had a lot of pressure from my boss, like 100 times more than I give you, to make sure that the church kids were involved in the youth ministry. Right. And we had, 500, 700 students coming, maybe 650 of them didn't have parents that went to the church. I mean, it's the vast majority of them. But because I was getting lots of pressure constantly, I would tell the parents whenever I got a microphone, hey, you need to help me help you. Like if you don't make your kid go to the youth ministry, I'm never going to build a relationship with them. My staff is never going to connect with them. They're never going to make friends. And I would say that is the thing about youth ministry that has not changed today. That if mom and dad who've raised the kid in church don't make them come to the youth services, people would rather not do something than do something. Because, I'd rather play video games, watch TV, hang out with my friends, whatever. So you need to really strongly encourage them to come, or don't be surprised if when they're in their early 20s, you're very upset that they are not connected in their faith.
Yep, true. Absolutely. Also, you have way more influence in their faith than you might realize of the transparency of how you live behind closed doors.
Yep.
Yeah, that is true.
Yeah.
Free.
No, that is.
I like how you said, he was like, what does the ministry need? I said, it needs to be cool. And you said, it needs to have the Holy Spirit. So
both.
That just shows the difference between young adults and youth.
Yeah, I mean, it needs to be very relevant. And
Yeah.
it needs to also be in revival. I mean,
does,
if both of
yeah.
those things together make a church, any ministry really, really, really compelling. I will say this, and I hear what Claire said. I'm receiving it, not about the internship, but in general. The one thing I would say is that teenagers and young adults have not changed in 30 years.
Really? Yeah.
And here's what I would say. Everybody wants friends. I mean, it's
true.
really what it boils down to. Everybody wants friends.
Yeah.
Everybody wants mentors in their life. Everybody wants husbands and wives. It's always kind of been the same thing. And then in the end, everybody needs Jesus. And without Jesus, they're lost. So last question and we're done. You guys were amazing, but I'm dying to know what you guys in your ministries and in your demographic feel about the fact that it was just announced that on Sunday, this Sunday, TikTok app will be removed from access to the United States.
I haven't been on TikTok in 2 years.
Yeah.
I'm
I just
glad.
watched a video
Sorry
that
about
my
that.
daughter did on TikTok, which was absolutely adorable. I mean, they were dancing with blindfolds on, and I was like, I wonder if Rachel even knows there's going to be no TikTok in 5 days.
Rachel loves making TikTok videos. So that's going to be very hard for her.
Well, how's it going to be for you?
Well, I'm not on it. I've been off and on, but it's so addicting. I have to delete it. I don't care, unfortunately.
That's
I don't
right.
have any
I'm starting to
social media.
actually something I'm noticing, a lot of younger students are starting to kind of add some distance to themselves in social media.
Okay,
which is
side
crazy.
note, I have met probably 10 people recently who have completely deactivated or deleted their Instagram.
So I feel like that's gonna be the next phase in these
Yeah, but
next
isn't
couple of
that
years.
the cool thing to do? I'm going to
No,
deactivate it and then reactivate it
No,
again?
not
Not
that though.
yeah.
People being I'm
done.
done. Maybe in a few years I'll get
Yeah.
it again or something, but really I'm out.
So I'm talking with you students. I'm like, dude, share our post, and they're like,
Yeah,
I don't have Instagram.
Yeah.
I don't have Snapchat.
Yeah, some
I
of
don't
our
have TikTok
interns-
anymore. And I'm like,
Yeah.
why?
Do they have Facebook?
No, nobody has Facebook.
I have
anymore.
Facebook. I will say I have to have it to share the stream.
I do. I have it for work.
Yeah. Share the stream, everyone.
That's right. Always.
Like us on Facebook.
Share,
Follow us
review.
on Instagram.
So Instagram and things like that are being uncool now.
I honestly,
People are
yeah.
just want to be. They want to be a little bit more disconnected. I feel like it's going to bring more organic connection
I'm
than anything.
so excited. I hate social media. I think it's the most toxic thing to ever come to our planet, and so I
What
cannot
happened to you?
wait.
The man wants to tear us down.
I've always been this
man.
way. I've just fallen into the trap. I deleted my Instagram. I can't. Maybe I'll get it back in once a year, have it for a couple months. But dude,
If I wasn't overseeing the youth Instagram, I would also delete Instagram.
yeah. That was me. As soon as I stopped being the YA pastor, I deactivated my account because
Oh.
now I can finally I don't have to run a page.
I guess I quit.
So
You don't have an Instagram anymore?
I don't know. It was my goal for the first 6 months of the year to be off Instagram So I deactivated my account, but I might get it
And
back.
your goal to be off because you were obsessively looking at it?
Yeah, like total. Isn't everyone? But maybe besides you, but most people my
Hey,
age.
There's this new
I
thing
like
called
Instagram for one reason. Companies send me free swag.
Sure.
That's literally
Sure.
why I like it.
Free
Once
stuff.
I got to a certain amount of followers, I just started getting free stuff sent in the mail.
That
Must
is
be
an
nice.
absolutely insane sentence that you just said.
I was
that.
just informed I'm getting sent a Pitch Perfect t-shirt.
Okay, great.
So he's an influencer.
Yep.
He has the blue
Big
check mark.
influencer.
No,
Influencer
I
VP.
don't.
You don't have the blue check
I don't-
mark?
I
He
do,
does.
but I don't make any
Bought
money
it.
off of my social media. I think I get like $40 a month.
That's actually not bad. That's more
I
than
get
I
zero.
made.
Yeah.
Well, there it is. You guys were great. Thank you very much. If you enjoyed this episode, please share this with your friends. Share this with your friends that are parents of teenagers and young adults. We really care about the next generation, but we need you to help us help them. And one of the ways you do that is by getting them involved. And you were able to hear from Claire and Johnny, hear their heart. You realize that these are really cool people that love their peers, love people they work with, and your student could be involved in their lives if you would help them. So again, like, subscribe, share. Next week, Chad Robertshaw, 5 million followers
Crazy.
on his podcast.
Sign up for winter camp.
So we'll see what Chad has to say. He spoke at our veterans event. He was amazing. But thank you guys. Tony, if you listen this far, we miss you. We want you to start coming back to work.
Hope you're having fun in the Keys.
Never forget, Jesus is the hope of the world. Let's make him famous.
Raiders roll.
No, you ain't looking for a shout out or a spotlight. You're just happy to be.